This is Yeronga Quick Tracks with Ms Nguyen and Ms Truong, and I'm Ben. A bit of background, so you guys, I don't know, were you born in Australia? Were you born in Vietnam? What's the story behind that?
So I was born in Vietnam in 1980. So my story, so we're refugees. So we're actually boat people. So my father was a police officer in Vietnam. He supported, we lived in the South. Yep. So he was, pro-American.
Yep.
When the North invaded the South, my dad was arrested and put into a re-education camp for 5 years, doing heavy labour. So the labour included like pulling logs. It's interesting because in the camps you have to rely on your family to bring you food and water. They provided nothing to you.
Yeah, right.
At the time, my mum was really wealthy, like very, very wealthy, had a number of stationery shops, but when the communists won, that all got shut down because they don't believe in capitalism. Yeah. So my mum had a peddle, and it was interesting because mum was peddling on the streets, and then she got arrested for trying to make money. So whilst my dad was in the camp, my mum was arrested and couldn't really go and see my dad to provide him food. So look, by the time my dad got out, my mum, they just said, well, we have to leave Vietnam. Like, it's not safe for us to be here. And so they paid people smugglers. They paid, and saved so much money to get the people smugglers, and it took numerous attempts. And we ended up fleeing. It was on a night, and I remember my parents telling me that my mum got into the boat with over 200 people in this small little boat, and there was no room for my dad. My dad just goes, go without us, and mum was like, no. She grabbed my dad, and mum said, if I didn't pull your dad onto that boat, we would have left without him. And then on that boat, there was no food. So my dad, being inventive as he is, he tried to make water from boiling seawater. He tried to drink the condensation from the lid. But my mum said that both you and your older sister almost died on that boat because we just had no water or food. And then we ended up in Malaysia, and as you do, you wait, and we had to wait for America, Canada, or Australia to accept us. And we were just very fortunate that the Australian Catholic Church in Cairns supported us over to Australia. We were sponsored by an Australian family.
Wow.
So that's my journey to Australia.
That's pretty insightful, because we wouldn't have a clue what that's like. We live in a country that's very well off, very well to do. We don't have to worry about half of those things, but you have that as your story, and it's
it's interesting with the war, because the war pretty much broke families up, and it's sort of like, because my dad's side was pro-communist, they were not, and it in a way my dad, his father got him arrested. His father could have got him out of the camps, but he didn't, because he's actually pro-communist. And if we didn't leave, my dad would have been in prison for another 10 years. If he didn't leave. So that really broke down his relationship with his father and his side of the family. So
so it's pretty full-on, pretty intense things.
How about you, Miss?
I'm just listening and to your story, and it's very, very similar to my story, where I was like a little baby at the time, so I don't really remember, but I do remember I know 3 stories of my family telling me what happened. So my dad was I think he was like a, what do you call it, like a helicopter pilot for the army for the South at the time. And so after the war ended and the North Vietnamese Communist Party won, we had to leave. Well, my dad thought, no, this is not going to end well for us. So so he had, like Ms Truong, he had tried numerous times to flee the country. And I think he said it was on the 7th attempt that it was actually successful. And to go on the boat, on the people smugglers, they want a lot of money from you. So I think my dad's side of the family had to
put together so much
everyone
just had to give money to each other to get people out.
And it was at the time it was really, really difficult because economically we didn't have the funds, so I'm not sure how they even did that. But so my dad took my 3rd eldest brother, because at the time my 3rd eldest brother was the most educated amongst all of our kids, so he took him with my dad, and then they also arrived in Malaysia.
Oh,
I don't know if they met each
the
other.
same time or the same camp.
Maybe, I don't know.
The check.
But yeah, they were in the refugee camp in Malaysia for a few years before they were able to get accepted into one of the countries. So it was, my dad was like, it was either America, Canada, or Australia, and he thought Australia would be a really good choice because he had read that Australia has many opportunities, that and less population, is like less populated in Australia, so he thought Australia would be the better choice. And he came to Australia first, and then I think it was after a couple of years or so, through the help of the Vietnamese community in Australia, they were able to help my dad sponsor us over to Australia.
Yeah.
So I arrived in Australia when I was like in 1994.
Yep.
So I was like about 3.5 at the time.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Wow.
One of the questions that I did have, you guys can either answer it together or separately, is in my generation we barely know anything about the Vietnam conflict. The only sort of media that we get from the Vietnam conflict would be from like the song "I Was Only 19" or Forrest Gump, and I think it's a pretty big disservice to what happened. So can you explain from your point of view what the Vietnam conflict was? What was it?
There you go. You go, Miss.
I mean, I'll try to explain, but the Northern Vietnamese government wanted to unite the whole of Vietnam, so that was their goal, to unite the whole of Vietnam together. So before, during the Indochina War, we had France colonizing Vietnam for a while, and then at the end of that, the Vietnamese government were able to win that war, and the French had to leave. But so they had that goal of reuniting Vietnam. The Northern were pro-communism, and then the South of Vietnam were pro-democracy. And so at that time, I think the American government thought that they wanted to stop the spread of communism.
Yep.
Because they were, scared that if Vietnam was going to be a communist country, then
Spread.
the rest of the countries there would be communists, and then so they tried to stop that. So they were supporting the South Vietnamese people with all of these, funding them with like weaponry and funds and all of that. And so we just had two different, approaches to what they wanted Vietnam to look like, democratic or communist. So that was, I guess, why that conflict happened in Vietnam.
Yeah. Do you have anything to add, Miss?
No, it's more about ideology, isn't it? It's about what, I guess the West were very scared of the communists back then. When you think about Russia and China and what was happening around then. For Vietnam to become a communist country, scared a lot of the Western countries, and therefore they, became involved in the conflict.
Yeah.
A lot of my, I guess, views are really biased because of my parents' views around the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
So, I have a very biased view about it, but, even though I have a biased view about it, I still read about the war.
Yeah.
I still look at the documentaries. I was really fortunate that I went back to Vietnam, and we actually went to the capital and went in and saw where that pivotal point when the then Prime Minister had to be helicoptered out because the North came in and just took over, and it was just really it's really how do I put it, just a moment where you just had to just step back and just take it all in, because it was being there at that, you just think, wow, this is this happened here, and my parents lived through this. So.
One final question I have is, would you recommend the army to people growing up in Australia? Would you recommend it?
I never thought about it.
Yeah.
I think it's important that it's important that we do have a defence force.
Yeah.
it's absolutely important that we are able to protect our Australian borders.
Yep.
I'm not pro-war by any means, but at the same time, I feel that we need to protect our freedom.
Yeah.
We're very fortunate in Australia that we're so far away from other countries who are trying to, to invade us. But in saying that, to protect our, Australian way of life, it is important.
Yeah.
And if, people have that deep sense of, a protection, of wanting security, and and the whole just wanting to protect Australia. Absolutely, I absolutely. If that's what they feel that that's their purpose, that they feel strongly about, then absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, like, if any of my families wanted to join the army, I wouldn't exactly be happy about it, just because I just feel like, I would want them here with me, but if they feel like that's their calling, or they feel really strongly about it, then absolutely, support that decision.
Yeah, so everyone's different, but overall it's a necessary evil.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that's pretty much all my questions. I really appreciate your time today, Ms. Truong, Ms. Nguyen. Thank you so much for coming along. It's really appreciated.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for asking so many good questions.
Thank you.